Hey! So in this video, I'm going to be comparing an old build with old GPUs to a new build with new RTX GPUs. So for any of you out there with old hardware considering upgrading, this video is for you. So this PC here is what I'm going to be using as the example of an old build. I only put her together last week, but all of the components are from roughly around 2014. She's using a quad-core i7-4790K, an MSI Z97 Gaming 7 motherboard, and 16GB of 2133MHz DDR3 memory. And then this here is my example of a modern build. This build was actually sent to me already built by MSI just for this video, and I think they've done a really good job with it. It looks very clean. It's using a 6-core i7-8700K on an MSI Z390 Tomahawk motherboard with 16GB of 3000MHz DDR4 memory. If you're interested in the rest of the specs for these two systems, you'll be able to find them in the description box below. Although I should mention this build is using MSI's brand new MPG Gungnir 100 case, and I was supposedly the first person in the UK to have gotten my hands on one, which is a very exciting achievement. It's a nice looking case, very black and stealthy, with some cool RGB accenting and a tempered glass side panel. However, personally, I do think that a modern, performance-focused case should have a less restrictive front panel design. So now onto the GPUs that I'm going to be testing. The two cards that I'm going to be featuring in the old build is my Asus Strix GTX 970, which is a 4GB card from 2014, and my Asus Strix GTX 780, which is an even older card still, being from 2013. However, the 780 actually has double the amount of reference VRAM, having 6GB, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how it's held up. Whereas I already have a very good idea with the 970, as I've been using it in my game PC until only about 4 months ago now. And then for the new GPUs that will be in the new build, I have 3 MSI Nvidia RTX 2000 series cards. Their 6GB 2060 gaming Z card, their 8GB 2070 gaming Z card, and lastly their 8GB 2080 Gaming X Trio card. Now I just wanted to say quickly that this video isn't sponsored by MSI, despite them having lent me a modern PC and some cards to feature in this video. No money exchanged hands or anything like that. So with these 3 cards, they're all using twin Forza 7 coolers of increasing size, and they represent the highest end air-cooled cards that MSI currently offer for each of the respective Nvidia GPUs, so this should make for a reasonably fair comparison. Jumping straight into the benchmarks, starting with Metro Exodus. This benchmark was done on the high graphical preset with ray tracing and DLSS off. And as you can see, even for 1080p, the older system is struggling massively. On the new build, the RTX 2060 holds above 60 FPS average for 1080p. The 2070 almost manages a 60 FPS average for 1440p. And the RTX 2080 proves itself very capable of 1440p gaming, and with some sacrifices to the settings, you could definitely get a very decent 4K experience out of it. It is important to note though that the built-in benchmark used here is more intensive than the real-world gameplay that you would experience within Metro Exodus, so all these performance figures here are the worst case scenario. So moving on to Forza Horizon 4, this is on the Ultra preset, and the 970 in the old build proves that it still has some life left in it yet. This game is so well optimised, and I think it actually looks quite good graphically, so it's just a case of how much you're willing to lower the settings by to hit the frame rate that you're after. With the new build and the new cards, even the cheapest option, the RTX 2060, manages to get an average of 60 FPS in 4K. But if you do want your 1% lows above 60 in 4K, or if you want high refresh rate gaming, perhaps with a variable refresh rate monitor, then the higher end cards are the way to go. Next is Assassin's Creed Odyssey on the high preset. The GTX 780 proves again to be a disappointment. I was really hoping to see its increased VRAM come into play, but I guess VRAM capacity can't help a 6-year-old GPU. The GTX 970 also struggles at these settings. For 1080p 60 FPS gaming, again the RTX 2060 proves more than enough, but it also holds its own at 1440p. Unfortunately though, even the 2080 can't hit 4K 60 with these settings. And then finally we've got Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and this is basically the same story, with the old build showing its age and the new build performing better when you spend more on your GPU. So really exactly as you'd expect. However, One big problem with this type of benchmarking is that it doesn't reflect how you'd actually use these cards, as you wouldn't play a game with an RTX 2060 at the same settings that you would if you had an RTX 2080. For example, in my last GPU video, which was a look at the RTX 2060 Founders Edition, I showed that a 2060 is quite capable of giving you a good gaming experience, even when outputting to a 4K monitor, because you can lower the resolution scaling to 80% of native 4K, and then bring the graphical settings down a little depending on the game, in order to hit a player or frame rate. So to illustrate my point, I'll use Far Cry 5's built-in benchmark. With the 2060, I'd output this game in 4K, but with the resolution scaling set to 80%. Then I'd use the high graphical preset and have the HD texture pack on. Then with the 2070, I'd up the resolution scaling to 90% and go from high to ultra settings, although both of these things not making as much of a difference to the visuals as you'd expect. And finally, with the 2080, I'm able to run it in native 4K. So for me personally, as I have a 4K monitor and a 4K TV, these three RTX cards are all 4K cards, even the 2060. It's just that as you go from the more expensive GPUs down to the cheaper ones, you have to be willing to make some compromises. But just in case you're curious, these are the settings that I'd use if I preferred frame rate over resolution and had a 1440p 144Hz G-Sync monitor. Following on with this how I'd play comparison, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at an RTX title, in this case Battlefield 5. On the old system with the GTX 780, I'd play in 1080p on high settings, and this gets around 55 to 65 frames per second. And with the 970, I'd play with the same settings, but with the frame rate now hitting between 58 to 70 during gameplay instead. And then with the new build, I now have to decide between frame rate, resolution and ray tracing. And for me, if I bought one of these cards and had therefore paid the RTX tax, I'd feel compelled to have to run them with RTX on, because otherwise it would just get to me. So with the 2060, I'd play with the resolution set to 1440p, with high settings and DXR set to low. At least that's how I'd play the single player anyway. And this gives me between 45 to 60 FPS, but the frame rate does stick at around 60 during scenes where there's no ray trace reflections to look at. And then upgrading to the 2070, I've chosen to stay within that 45 to 60 FPS range and use the extra horsepower to increase the resolution to 80% 4K. And this gives me a noticeable improvement in clarity over how I play with the 2060. And then finally, with the 2080, I'd keep everything the same, but enjoy much better frame rate, with dips going only as low as 55 instead of 45 like with the 2070. So an important part of this video is for me to test and isolate what performance increase is down to the GPU, and what's down to the CPU, memory and motherboard platform. Initially, I actually found it very difficult to see any benefit from having a better CPU. In fact, there were occasions where the older CPU would actually outperform the newer CPU in terms of frame rate. But I suspect those times were down to the game engines using some sort of dynamic graphical settings, which change depending on your hardware. But there are instances where some games can be more CPU bound, like for example this benchmark, which is Assassin's Creed Odyssey on medium settings. And with this benchmark, you can see that the CPU upgrade will improve your 1% lows on even older cards, and that an RTX 2060 will be significantly bottlenecked by an older CPU. Adding in the 2070 and 2080, you can see the differences between these cards aren't huge. This I expect is actually down to us hitting the limitations of the stock clocked 8700K, or the limitations of the game engine. But to check and see if it is the limitations of the 8700K, I decided to give it a quick and dirty 5GHz overclock. And while this made no difference to the 2060, it did make a small improvement to both the 2070 and 2080. The overall takeaway here is that if your use case is very GPU intensive, especially if you want a game in higher resolutions, a CPU upgrade is not really going to help you. But if instead you're interested in very high refresh rate gaming, then you may need a better CPU to get the most out of your GPU. But personally for me, I'd always prioritise my GPU in a gaming build. With that said, if you do want to do any CPU intensive tasks outside of gaming, like video editing for example, then the CPU upgrade makes a lot of sense. So I know that this video didn't really have any particular direction to it, but I do hope that it was still useful or interesting to at least someone out there. I'm not really sure what the overall takeaway is from this video though. I mean, it's a difficult time to upgrade because we have new CPUs and GPUs coming from AMD, and we have rumoured price cuts and the new super variant GPUs expected to be announced by Nvidia any day now. So my advice really is just to wait before making any decisions on getting a new PC or on making any upgrades to your existing system, at least for a month or so until we can see how everything settles. But anyway, so yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts and your plans to upgrade in the comments below. Which to the point, if you're wondering whether you should buy a factory overclocked GPU or not, I recently made a video on a stock 2070 versus a factory overclocked 2070, which you may find helpful. So if you like this video, then please hit the like button. If you haven't already and you want to see more of my videos, please don't forget to subscribe, or perhaps consider becoming a patron. And thank you for watching.